All-electric homes aren't just clean and healthy, they save energy and money too. Lucky you, the DC Sustainable Energy Utility, or DCSEU, makes home electrification easier and more affordable than ever. Affordable as in district residents can get up to $15,000 off upgrades. Income-qualified folks, no cost. Get rebates for heat pumps that warm and cool efficiently. Induction stoves that boil water faster than Donna Summer can say, well, hot stuff. But funding will not last, so visit dcscu.com/electric and bust a move on energy-efficient electrification for your home.
Sometimes the most meaningful gifts or decorations aren't just regular old family pictures. I'm talking about your treasured high school football jersey, a ticket from your first concert, or a flyer for a loved one's art show. These are your most sentimental possessions, and they can be protected and immortalized by the perfect frame. You know, I just got an old passport of my dad's framed. He died a couple years ago, and I don't know why. This really spoke to me. Luckily, FrameBridge makes it easy and affordable to custom frame just about anything. Just pick the perfect frame for your piece from their curated selection of styles, and their design experts will do the rest. And they'll ship it right to your doorstep for free on orders over $100. Best of all is FrameBridge's happiness guarantee. If you're not 100% happy with your piece for any reason, they'll make it right. Visit framebridge.com or one of 8 local FrameBridge stores at 14th Street, Union Market, Georgetown, Bethesda, Old Town, Clarendon, McLean, or the Mosaic District, and start framing. Today on CityCast DC, so for 25 years, they've been trying to build housing on top of an open parking lot next to the Takoma Metro station. 25 years in a region that is supposedly obsessed with fixing its affordable housing crisis. So what's taken so long, and what does it say about the prospects for other ideas to create more of the housing that our city needs? The Washington Post's Aaron Weiner explains. Today is Tuesday, July 22nd. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC's talking about. Hey, Aaron.
Hey, Mike. How's it going?
Good to see you.
Likewise.
So you wrote this insane story about something that didn't happen, which is that there's that parking lot in Tacoma, and it was supposed to turn into housing for 25 years, and nothing ever got built. Year after year after year, they tried, and nothing happened. Can you explain what was happening all that time? Can you give us a blow-by-blow of the last 25 years of this parking lot?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is nothing. The parking lot looks pretty much the same as it did 25 years ago, even though Metro picked a developer to turn it into housing back in 2000. And, I think the reasons for that say a lot about why it's so hard to build housing in DC and across the country. This was agreed upon as a plan back in 2000 that this would be a better use of the land. And, DC as a city has been largely supportive of the idea of transit-oriented development, that there shouldn't be a sea of surface parking right next to a metro station, but that's a good place to have people living. But for various procedural reasons and through the power of community opposition, it's dragged on and on and on. And here we are 25 years later with still a surface parking lot.
You mentioned Metro owned the land, but there's been an increasing awareness in the last years that, look, housing in Washington is really expensive and quite scarce. So there has been city policy for a lot of these 25 years is to try to find more housing. So Metro owns it. What did they want to build there, and who didn't want that to happen?
So the project has actually changed quite a bit over time. It started out as a plan for townhouses there on the site next to Metro. And essentially a group of neighbors from both sides of the DC-Maryland line started raising opposition to it. The project is in DC, but residents of Takoma Park, Maryland felt they ought to have a say. And so they got their congressman involved, who's now a senator, Chris Van Hollen. And people on both sides of the line got the highest level politicians involved who they could enlist, and basically just kind of slowed the process and dragged it on and threw up roadblocks to the various phases of development and sent EYA, the developer, back to the drawing board to rework the plan.
What didn't they like about it?
Various things. So one piece of criticism was that there is some green space currently on the site. There's grass and trees that some people in the community use as a public space, and they didn't like the way that would be reconfigured and shrunk down as part of the plan. It's not, in my experience, super widely used, but it reminds me a little bit of the debate over the McMillan development in DC, where there have been all these people who are pushing to stop the development to keep it as kind of a green space in a park, even though it has been fenced off and underutilized for a very long time.
But listen, like a lot of times people evoke green space, you're going to take away the park. That's not really the reason. And there's a lot of bad faith or allegations of bad faith going on. Did these folks just not want more people and housing in their neighborhood?
I don't want to try to guess what people have going on inside their heads, but I will say, I've talked to some of the prominent opponents, and actually it's some of the same people who have been opposing it consistently over a quarter century. And they have, a litany of complaints about the project. They think that the density is out of scale with the surrounding community, which is something that you often hear about development projects that are getting some community opposition. There's concerns about traffic and parking. There's concerns about the design of the project. And frequently invoked is the question of affordable housing and whether enough of the housing is going to be affordable. Now, proponents of the development are going to come back and say, okay, these are things that people say in opposition to pretty much every project, and they may not really be genuine critiques. They're just ways to try to stop development because people don't like having new buildings and new traffic and lots more people in their backyards. And, I can't really say whether all of the critiques are heartfelt or whether some of them might be exaggerated. But there are a lot of concerns that some neighbors have raised.
Was there anything they did like that they would have rather had there other than the status quo ante?
Well, the thing that's very interesting is how the project has changed over the course of these 25 years as there's been opposition. Because, the standard critique is that a project is too big and out of scale with the neighborhood. And yet, as the opposition has mounted over the decades and things have slowed down, the project has only grown and grown. So it went from being, around 90 townhouses initially to now being upward of 400 apartments that are planned in a much denser development. And, I will say that for all the opposition, there's also a lot of neighborhood support. And one thing that I've observed and others have observed is, a generational change here, that the construction of more housing is seen as a real social need by a lot of people in a younger generation, while the older generation of, very progressive-minded people tended to see and continues to tend to see developers as a part of a capitalist system that doesn't have the public good in mind. And so these two things are in tension, but I think you're starting to see a shift, and that's been reflected in the fact that this does finally seem to be moving forward now.
So in this quarter century that you chronicled, we say nothing happened, but in fact, lots was happening. They first proposed to put up townhouses. They then recast the project, I think, to try to mollify some of this opposition as apartments. A bunch of stuff was going back and forth. And you've just mentioned, people were saying it's out of scale with the neighborhood. As a matter of the law of DC, I can have my opinion about architecture or scale or what the ideal scale is. How empowered am I to impose that opinion, that criticism on someone who owns a piece of land?
So that's a very good question. A lot of it comes down to zoning and zoning approvals that are needed. And so when projects go before the zoning commission or the Board of Zoning Adjustment, neighborhood voices are heard, and the voice of the Advisory Neighborhood Commission is taken into account. And these zoning boards then do have the authority to say, nope, you have to go back to the drawing board because what we're hearing is that this is not the way the project should be designed, right? Anything that you're doing other than as a matter of right that's allowed completely within the existing zoning regulations needs these approvals, and that gives an opportunity for people to step in and voice their opposition. And that's something that I think a lot of pro-development people want to see changed, reducing the bureaucracy that allows for these voices of opposition to have so much influence.
Well, their line is that, you can get 20 really impassioned people who show up at a community meeting, and they will wind up having more power than like hundreds of people who feel like vaguely in favor of something. Is that an accurate knock, do you think?
Yeah, there have been studies recently that have shown that the people who show up at these meetings are not representative of the general public. They tend to be older, they tend to be whiter, they tend to be wealthier because, people who are working one or two jobs or have kids to take care of, might not be able to show up repeatedly at these public meetings. And so there is reason to believe that the voices that are loudest are not necessarily, representative of the prevailing opinion. But on the other hand, there definitely is real opposition that's happened here and with other projects, and our system takes those voices into account.
All right, suffice it to say, we are in some morally ambiguous times right now, rife with hot-button issues. So it makes sense that we'd need help sorting through sticky situations and moral dilemmas. Enter philosopher and New York Times ethics columnist Kwame Anthony Appiah. He'll be at the Library of Congress on July 24th for a live event, Ask the Ethicist, hosted by the library's John W. Kluge Center. Explore real-world moral dilemmas and cast your vote on what you would do. Then hear how one of today's most influential public philosophers thinks through the same questions. Thoughtful, engaging, and full of surprising moments, this interactive program allows you to reflect on everyday ethical questions in a way that's personal, relevant, and fun. That's Ask the Ethicist, this Thursday at the Library of Congress. Get free tickets at loc.gov/live.
When someone else's negligence changes your life forever, figuring out what to do next can feel overwhelming. You need lawyers who won't back down. NACE Law Group has been winning serious injury and wrongful death cases in D.C. for decades. They don't just settle, they fight for real justice. And they're not afraid to take cases to court to get it. Because when you're facing medical bills, lost wages, and unimaginable pain, good enough isn't good enough. You might remember them as Paulson and Nace. It's the same trusted lawyers, just a new name. If you need someone in your corner, reach out to NACE Law Group for a free, no-obligation consultation. Visit WashingtonDCLawyers.com or call 202-463-1999. That's 202-463-1999.
This episode of CityCast is sponsored by Babbel. Learning a new language opens the door to new friends, new cultures, maybe even a whole new life. So why not start that journey today? You can start speaking a new language with confidence thanks to Babbel's conversation-based technique that quickly teaches you useful words and phrases about the things you actually talk about in the real world. I'm CityCast CEO David Plotz, and I've been learning Spanish with Babbel, just one of the 12 languages you can learn with it, including Dutch, French, Italian, which is going to be next for me, Turkish, and Russian. I love the interactive dialogues that Babbel has, which allow me to practice what I've learned right away, and also the speech recognition function, which makes sure I'm getting the pronunciation just right, which honestly, usually I'm not. Also, I love that Babbel's lessons always cover actual things that I talk about in the real world, like food, talking to people I've just met, and also food. Staying motivated to learn a new language has never been easier thanks to real-time feedback, progress trackers, and handy visualizations, in only 10 to 15 minutes a day on Babbel's mobile app or website. So get talking with Babbel. I want you to learn another language, so I'm teaming up with Babbel to gift you 55% off subscriptions, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/citycast. Get up to 55% off at babbel.com/citycast. Spelled BABBEL.com/citycast. Babbel.com/citycast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso Virtual Coffee Machines. Ready to enjoy the bold flavors of barista-quality Nespresso iced coffee at home? Simply fill a glass with ice and press the brew button on your virtual pop machine to enjoy rich double espressos roasted to stand up even when chilled. Refreshingly bold iced coffee. Refreshingly easy to make at home. Visit Nespresso.com to shop now.
So 25 years of this, of back and forths, of litigation, of community meetings, of complaints, et cetera, et cetera. Now something has changed that has allowed this to get off the ground. What's happened?
So they've gone through a whole bunch of rounds of approval, but the latest plans actually finally had the backing of the Neighborhood Commission, and they got their zoning approval. They passed a certain period where the approval doesn't detract any sort of opposition. And so now, they are able to move forward if they can secure the financing. And this is sort of the cruel twist that comes at the end of all of this, which is that now that they've waited 25 years, they find themselves in this extremely high interest rate environment where they are now having to make the math work just at a different level. And so it's harder in a lot of ways to do it now than it would have been a few years ago, or maybe even 20 years ago. But they are hopeful that they'll be able to get that lined up and get this project started at the end of next year.
Your story made my head pop off, right? It's the city that doesn't have enough housing for our, not just for our poor people, but even for our middle class to live in. And here we have exactly where you're supposed to build apartments or dense houses, which is to say right on top of public transit. So people, don't have to drive. It's all good for the environment. It's everything that we say we want. And yet we couldn't do it. And you're right that this is sort of emblematic of how hard it is to build in DC. You mentioned McMillan. Are there other cases that sort of fit into the same category?
Yeah, there's this other project that's right by the Brooklyn Metro station that's been in the works since 2008, and they keep getting the same opposition in the zoning process and have to keep going back to the drawing board. And they're trying yet again, and very well maybe 20 years from the start to when they actually start building it there. And these are not rarities. I will say that there's evidence that things are changing to a degree. I mean, part of the reason that the plans in Takoma have been able to expand is that Metro loosened its rules around parking and decided that it was okay to not have any parking right next to a metro station. And that allowed them to revise their plans and include a lot more housing. So, I think there is a growing recognition among city leaders and among leaders of agencies like WMATA, which runs Metro, that this is the direction where things should be going, that housing near transit is good and you don't necessarily need lots of parking there that can make it harder to make the housing pencil out. But it doesn't mean that things move quickly.
So this is all very much in the air right now, too. This is the theme of Ezra Klein's book, Abundance, and a lot of the sort of reformist talk among Democrats, which is that we can't build anything anymore. We have to cut down on the things that make us stop, that make us unable to build things. And that was also a theme of Mayor Muriel Bowser's DC budget address. She says she's going to cut down on red tape that stalls development. What are some of the changes that could have made this particular project go faster if they'd been in place?
Well, one thing that did allow it to move forward was a change to the comprehensive plan, that it didn't necessarily change what was allowed, but it made the developers feel more confident moving forward that they would be able to do this without getting sued and that they would be able to hold up in court if they did. So the city guidance around what density of development is allowed in different places and what's recommended actually does go a long way toward making it easier or harder to do these projects. The mayor has talked a lot about the amount of housing that she has wanted to build and touted reaching her goal for housing production. I believe it was last year. And, DC is beating a lot of its peers in housing construction over the past couple of decades. But a lot of that was kind of the low-hanging fruit that came in certain infill neighborhoods like Navy Yard, like the Southwest Waterfront, like Noma a little bit earlier.
That is to say, these are neighborhoods where there weren't a whole lot of neighbors to start with. Ergo, there was fewer people who were motivated to use all the levers of power to slow stuff down.
Exactly. And there's central areas near metro stations where it's easy for the economics to work to build a lot of housing. And those opportunities are probably starting to dry up. And that's what makes projects like this one in Takoma so important. But it also means that, the city may have to work a little bit harder to encourage more housing in the future.
So you mentioned the sort of cultural or generational change, that Takoma is a very hippie, lefty neighborhood. And for a long time, the standard view was developers are evil capitalists. We must resist them. And the view is sort of changed to be like, wow, people who exclude housing are evil incumbents who raise the costs on poorer people. I think what I hear you saying is that switch has also affected city policy. When did that happen? Why?
A lot of it comes down to environmentalism, and we could get deep into this, but just, on a surface level, there was a time when environmentalism in America meant opposing projects that would infringe on nature. And that basically meant building is anti-environmentalist and preservation is environmentalist. And that was before climate change became the number one environmental concern. And I think, in the current generation where fighting climate change seems paramount, dense development is seen as a pro-environmental thing, and transit-oriented development is, seen as critical. And so you end up with a very different sort of lens through which to view all of this. And I think it really does shape a lot of these conversations.
You think the next time somebody proposes to build housing, something more dense than a neighborhood on a piece of open space, there are going to be fewer tools available to people who want to stop it?
Maybe at some point. I'm not sure that that's really happened yet. I do think the fact that the neighborhood commissions are turning over demographically and are made up of more people who have sort of a pro-development viewpoint is going to make it a little bit harder for the voices of opposition to carry quite as much weight.
So in the time that people in DC have been bickering over this parking lot, China has built an entire nationwide high-speed rail system. Not a lot of ability to bicker with the government there. You are about to leave us. You're going to Germany to be the Post's Berlin bureau chief.
That's right.
When you come back, I'm giving it 3 years. You think there's going to be housing on this lot?
I wouldn't bet on it. But I think we might see some machines moving some dirt.
All right. It's good to move dirt. Aaron, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Mike. It's been a pleasure.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.